Hi.
Hi again. Ray has been addressing the flip-flops on the issue of superior authority, Romans 13 verse 1. It addresses the side point here. Why is it that Christendom had light on this subject long before Russell, Rutherford, and the governing body? He takes it up this way. Yet there was no genuine change in understanding of relative subjection. Even if some minor differences of viewpoint were allowed, the radical reversals made in the organization's teachings about the higher powers would still be like starting out for a point that is due north, then turning around and heading south to a point essentially the same as where one started. That is not tacking, in which the zigging and zagging steadily and consistently bring the vessel closer to its goal. It is instead simply wasteful backtracking. The method of advancing in understanding presented in the Watchtower article has about as much to recommend it as would circumnavigating a 100-mile long island in order to arrive at a point just a mile or so from where you started.
As for recognizing the principle of relative subjection, one can find dozens of Bible commentaries that, when dealing with Romans chapter 13, make the point that Christian subjection to secular authorities is always relative, conditional. This is true of commentaries written 100 and 200 years ago, yes, even long before there was a Watchtower magazine. As just one example, the still popular commentary by Albert Barnes, Barnes Notes, written between 1832 and 1851, says of the injunction to submit to superior authorities, found at Romans 13:1, quote, "The word used here does not designate the extent of the submission, but merely enjoins it in general. The general principle will be seen to be that we are to obey in all things which are not contrary to the law of God. It would not be, and never was, a question whether they would obey a magistrate when he commanded a thing that was plainly contrary to the law of God." End of quote.
This is the identical position adopted by the Watchtower Society, and it was written before Charles Taze Russell was even born. Yet the Watchtower article quoted would make it appear that God led his anointed people to that light for the very first time as of 1962. The major fault of this whole back and forth concept and analogy is not simply that it does not fit the facts, but that it so gravely misrepresents God's historic manner of revealing truth to his servants.
Frequently, the example of the wrong viewpoint about circumcision held by many first-century Christians is cited as justification for the fluctuating views and reversals of various Watchtower teachings. However, rather than illustrate an erratic back-and-forth course, the wrong understanding by the early Christians only manifests a tendency on the part of some, primarily in Judea, to stay with a practice instituted by God himself many centuries earlier, a slowness to acknowledge that the shadows found in the law covenant had met up with the reality found in the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Theirs was not a case of switching back and forth on beliefs, but on being slow to move forward in understanding.
A reading of the scriptures as a whole demonstrates that God's revelation of his purposes to mankind through the various means of communication he employed, the inspired prophets and Bible writers, was one of steady progression. There is no wandering, no zigzagging, but an orderly unfolding of the divine purpose, each progressive step leading right onward to the next progressive step of revelation, without deviation or misdirection. That is one reason why we can put trust in the reliability of that written word. The zigzag course admitted in the Watchtower articles in no way demonstrates divine guidance. It demonstrates the opposite, namely imperfect human reasoning. Since we are all subject to such reasoning, this of itself is not the major problem. The real problem comes when men insist that their reasonings should be taken as divinely revealed truths, and condemn those who, in the free exercise of their personal judgment, find them otherwise.
To place implicit trust in a source that makes such extreme claims for itself, to fail to test its direction against the sure compass of God's revealed word, is a course that has nothing to recommend it. While certain rules of logic, such as those discussed, may be helpful in discerning falsity in argumentation, knowledge of them is not an essential. Our Creator has endowed us with natural intelligence, and if we avoid hasty acceptance and give ourselves time to think, to ask questions, prayerfully seeking the help of His Spirit, we can be protected against serious deception. Rather than stand in awe of men or their impressiveness in speech or writing, we should submit their sayings to test, should ask ourselves, has the point honestly been proved, or is it largely assertion? Is this the only reasonable explanation, so that I am obliged to accept it as truth?
Christian liberation and truth go together. We will never gain God's promised freedom unless we're willing to make the effort to determine what is truth and what is not. This does not require that we feel compelled to try to nail down the precise meaning of every single statement in Scripture. Many statements allow for more than one understanding, and the alternative understanding may be as compatible with the rest of the Scriptures as the initial one. The crucial truths, those on which our faith must rest, are such that all of us can understand. God's Son could thus thank His Father that He had hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children.
Our love of freedom, then, must be matched by our love of truth, and truth's companion, honesty. We may naturally incline to take the easier course, one of passive submission, but to suspend our God-given powers of critical thinking and analysis and become mere credulous acceptors of what men tell us is truth only leads to human bondage. Life itself depends on our being willing to bear the cost that love of truth requires. For God's approved worshippers must worship in spirit and truth.
I love this line. The crucial truths, those on which our faith must rest, are such that all of us can understand. And if even children, according to Christ, can trust in God, have real faith, then it shows that the basic truths have to be fairly simple. And that's one of the truths I've learned about the difference between a cult, like the Watchtower, and the creeds of Christendom. The creeds of Christendom agree on a kernel of truth, that is a core of truth, or if you like, a foundation of truth that is simple enough for children to understand.
The difference between essentials and non-essentials.
Yeah.
You know, so with witnesses, everything is essential. You basically have to believe everything. So if you argue about something that is of major importance, or if you argue about something that's not so important, like whether you should wear a beard or anything like that, it's viewed the same way by the organization.
As lack of trust.
Yeah, you're not trusting us, you're not listening to us, you're not obeying us.
It's an attitude problem you have.
Yeah, you're not submissive to our authority. And they claim authority then.
So when you can major in minors and therefore even disfellowship people for minor offenses, and we know people who've been disfellowshipped for not understanding, let alone promoting 1914, for instance. There's a difference between the spirit of the creeds, which after all go back at least 1,500 years. So we're going to put a link to one of the videos we did on the Apostles' Creed, which seems to be the oldest of the creeds that are generally agreed upon by Christendom. The 7 councils of the first 1,000 years of the church yielded creeds, and the simplest of them we'll analyze on your screen and mark the difference between creedal affirmations, these foundation truths, and everything else that Christians are allowed to differ on. And yes, it's true that the denominations in one way are a scandal to the cause of Christ, but in another way they witness to the fact that Christians can disagree and get away with it, because after all, the denominations were created over a space of about 500 years, the last 500 years, when there was a spirit of tolerance in the Western culture anyway.
It's a basic truth that as witnesses we think we have to belong to one place that has all truth, and that's just not possible. That
Not
everyone is going to have every single thing right. But if they have the essentials, then you can study all the other things, which are important, but they're not essential.
Yes, they're not life or death issues. Also, we're going to link on your screen, in addition to the one on the creeds, another series that was done 2 years ago on the Bible basis of authority, because a lot of Christians don't particularly agree with this one either. What is the Bible basis of authority? It centers on that word we learned well as Jehovah's Witnesses, the word witness. What constitutes, therefore, the authority of the apostles? So that series, I think it's 2 or 3 videos, they're linked together under the general head, the Bible basis of authority. So that's on your screen too. And next time we start a new chapter, chapter 14, a people for his name.